So I'm David. I go to Western Sydney right now, so I'm just going to be going through basically that course. So what the application process is like, what the prep is like, a bit of a taste onto the interview, and a bit about the course as well. Um, okay, so yeah, I graduated from Bruce in 2021. I'm finishing off my second year of medicine at Western Sydney. And I'm also teaching English at Top Logic as well. So yeah, I was in your guys' shoes not too long ago. So in terms of the application process, first we're going to begin off obviously by sitting the UCAT. Now the UCAT is a bit different for Western Sydney compared to other unis in the sense that your total mark in the UCAT is not actually going to matter as much. In Western Sydney, this one particular section called verbal reasoning, which is basically just comprehension, is going to be a lot higher weighted than the other sections. So that's a pretty important thing to keep in mind if you guys are considering applying for Western Sydney. Something to note though, that is that the threshold is a lot lower in terms of the score that's required if you're in the Greater Western Sydney area, which I'll go over in a bit as well. In terms of how much the UCAT actually matters into actually getting in, it's responsible for 25% of the aggregate mark, while the interview is responsible for the other 75%. So you actually do have to do decent in both parts. I know that some other unis only count your worst performing section or your best performing section or whatnot, but for Western Sydney, both of those count. So that's pretty important. Now, in terms of the general requirements into getting into Western Sydney, the ATAR requirement is the lowest out of the unis. It's 95.5 regularly, 93.5 if you're in Greater Western Sydney, and 91.5 if you're a rural applicant. Now, this is what it says on their website, but the thing about Western Sydney is you get your interview offers before you get your ATAR. So honestly, I'm not too sure how that works out, but the ATAR requirements are definitely lower than the other unis that you're going to hear from today. The UCAT, your overall mark, I know I said it doesn't count, but if you're in the 90th percentile, that's probably a pretty good estimate that you are reasonably safe. Once again, if you're in the Greater Western Sydney area, it is a lower cut. After you get your interview offer, there's going to be a pre-interview questionnaire, which is basically just 2 questions that you're going to have to answer before you actually sit the interview. The first question is going to be on a community that you identify with, and the second question is just going to be your involvement with the said community. So obviously these questions might change in future years, but that has been what it's trended towards in the past few years at least. Now, as with everything else that I'm going to mention, your answer itself, in the sense that, well, the community that you put or how big your involvement is with that community isn't actually important, right? You could go volunteering for some overseas thing with some big organization, or it could literally just be a community which is with like you and some of your family friends. I don't know, right? I know that some people in my year said that the community they related with was people who did the HSC with COVID, right? So the community itself isn't very important, but the point of this question is you're trying to show your own character, right? You're trying to show your own character, and you're trying to clearly mention how and why you identify with the community. It's important to note this questionnaire is not going to affect whether you get in or not, but it's going to change some of the questions that appear later on. Something important about this that I didn't mention is that if you are a Greater Western Sydney applicant, the community has to be within the Greater Western Sydney area as well. So I've mentioned Greater Western Sydney a bunch. This is the Greater Western Sydney area. It's massive, so please do check if you're in it, because there's a lower cut line for the UCAT score, there's a lower cut line for the interview. The questions are a bit different, like I mentioned in the questionnaire, but all you need to prove or be is that you need to have lived in this area in the last 5 years, even if you've moved houses, so very useful. For preparation and techniques, okay, so the interview itself is going to be an MMI structure, so a multiple mini interview. There's going to be 6 stations and 1 rest station. A rest station is basically just where you just sit there and wait for 1 station's time to go past. Each station's going to have 8 minutes speaking and 2 minutes reading, and there's going to be 1 interviewer per station. There's 1 community station, like I said, 1 rest stations, and 5 dilemma or decision-making stations, which I'm going to very quickly go over. In terms of the community station, now, once again, these questions are bound to change every year. This is based on the last 2 years of interviews. They ask you to expand upon the things that you've written in the pre-interview questionnaire. So these questions could be to do with how you actually identify or connect with the community, identifying a health, well-being, or social concern in that community, and explaining either what you've done to help that or what you would do to help that. And there could be another question, which is like, how could you help a community near where you study or live as a med student? Once again, in answering these, what you've actually done is not very important, right? Obviously, it's really nice if you've done things to help out your community. Good on you if you've done that, but it's not going to be the make or break, okay? As with every single other question, this is about showing your character, right? So in the year that's left, rather than, trying to find some random community to join so you can, make change to say things for the interview, rather it's about explaining your ability to show empathy, to take initiative, and also your ability to adapt to involve yourself in these unfamiliar communities and environments, right? I'm sure this is common to every single interview, but every single answer that is given should be done in the context of highlighting your own character, not just retelling, oh yeah, this is what I've seen, this is what I've done, all right? Okay, so the second type of station is going to be what I call the dilemma stations. So these are 2 examples of situations which might come up. So if you have a read of these, I don't think I'm going to read through them because time issues, but basically you're put in a situation where you're presented with 2 options generally, and both options are going to be correct and incorrect at the same time. Okay, so there's a situation and there's follow-up questions like, what are the factors you consider? What are the people you have to consider? What decision do you make? And what is a time in your life when you've had to make this kind of decision? Aside from these 2 examples that I've put up here as well, there are also examples like watching a doctor do something unethical, something going wrong in a study environment, those kinds of questions. But the point is that you are faced with a choice and you have to actually make a choice in here. So in terms of how you actually answer it, the actual choice that you choose is not important, just like the community stations, right? It doesn't matter whether you choose one option or the other, unless you choose an option which blatantly shows that you are a terrible person. Don't do that. So rather than the option that you choose, the more important part is how you can back that up, right? So it's really important that you actually do have to choose an option. You can't just go like, oh yeah, that's cool, this is also cool, I'm like sitting on the fence. You actually do have to choose something, and you do need to be able to explain why you chose that, clearly going through the stakeholders in the situation, and the reason why you decided to go with one option rather than the other. Now, following up from whatever choice you make, the interviewer might also ask questions or try to guilt trip you basically into changing your mind. You can't change your mind. You need to stay on your position and explain why you stand by it. Okay, the interviewer is actually testing you here to see whether you have thought your answer through. They're not expecting that your solution is going to be a perfect solution to the situation that's presented, but they are basically assessing your ability to get a situation, get the different factors, and make a judgment yourself. And just as a general thing, when you're talking about anecdotes and situations that you've had before, it is okay to say that you have flaws. It's okay to say that you have mistakes, because that's what they expect. If you pretend to be perfect, they're not going to like that. Those are the stations. Now, about the course, it's a 5-year course, which is crazy. It's crazy short, right? It's located in Campbelltown. I have a map of that on the next page. I'm dying to show you guys. So the course consists of 2 years of preclinical, which is all your normal things you do in uni, anatomy, histology, listening to lectures, practice placements. I'm finishing up on those this year. And then 3 years of clinical, where you basically go to hospital 5 times a week and you follow around doctors and you just learn from there. So I don't actually have to go to uni for a tutorial ever again in my degree, which I'm very happy with. And just as an extra thing, because I didn't know this when I applied, there is a chance that you get assigned to a rural placement in years 4 and 5. It is reasonably easy to get out of this, but be aware that it does exist. Now, for the pros and cons, 5 years is a really big pro, right? You're going to be finished 1 or 2 years earlier than your friends who go to other unis, which is great. And there's only 2 years of preclinical, right? Like I said, the last 3 years, you don't go to uni to watch lectures and things like that, which is good. Now, being placed rurally can be a pro or a con, however you think of it, but just be aware that it exists. Another pro is that, like you can see on the map, Campbelltown's very far away, so you're going to meet a lot of new people, and it's really nice to get out of that high school bubble and realize that people outside of high school exist. Crazy, right? Now, following on from that though, a big con is that it is in Campbelltown, so that's 60 kilometers away from Parramatta, which is near me. Uni life doesn't really exist, so there's not that many societies and things down there, to be honest. But yeah, that's a pretty big con. If you value that, maybe Western Sydney isn't amazing, right? But it still has its benefits as well, because it's not like it's impossible to make friends and stuff. Yeah, that's it from me.
This is my ultimate guide to UNSW Med. So first I'm going to talk about the course, because I want you to know what kind of course you're going to apply to. Then I'm going to talk about my journey to UNSW and the process and some tips. And then I'm going to give you some key takeaways, because I understand that people have short attention spans and just want to know what they can do. So who is Minnie? I'm Minnie, and here's a little bit about me. I went to NSG and then I transferred into James Roos, and I graduated in 2022. I'm currently attending UNSW Medicine. I finished my final exams yesterday, and I'm currently working as an English tutor at TopLogic. My experience, I sat 7 interviews. I sat them for UQ, SQ, CQU, UNSW, JMP, WSU, and Monash, and I received offers for some of my top preferences. I got an ATAR of 99.5, and my UCAT was in the 99th percentile. So, number 1, all about the course. How are you meant to choose UNSW if you don't even know what the degree is like? So this is what makes UNSW different. Not many students know much about the courses you're applying to, so here's how UNSW is structured. It's a 6-year-long degree, so you'll be graduating later than degrees at Western Sydney and also Monash, but you'll be graduating before your friends at USyd. So years 1 and 2, these are scenario-based learning. These are your Bachelor of Medical Studies degrees, so you learn a lot of theory. You learn histology, anatomy, all the other ones, physiology, etc. In 3rd year, you'll be in your clinical year. There's a lot of time in hospital, and there are no exams throughout the year, but there's a massive difficult one, your ICE, at the end. And in 4th year, that's your research year. You can opt to do ILP or honours. Honours does have a benchmark. You have to get a credit WAM, so that's 65. Years 5 and 6, these are your clinical placements. There's a lot of placements and a lot of difficult exams, a lot of sleepless nights apparently. More about UNSW. Minnie, I'm really worried about university exams. Isn't UNSW super academically challenging? Well, yeah, it kind of is. So I asked my friends to send me their timetables. This is my friend at USyd. She's very lovely. She's also doing an internship, so that's why it's a bit empty. But this is my timetable. As you can see, we have a very, very busy timetable. You need to get really good at time management if you want a social life. So yes, it is very academically challenging. And so is every other medicine degree. Throughout the term, I often follow a strict schedule to keep on top of my work. However, it's all about your priorities. If you just want to pass and make time to go partying, etc., then you would just make time to pass. You'll get the 49.5, and then you'll have enough time for a social life. The pass mark is 49.5 out of 100. A credit is 65, distinction is 75, and high distinction is 85. UNSW, however, does care about your mental health. I know it doesn't seem like it, but we have self-care days. You can take 2 a term with some rules. Supplementary exams if you fail. However, you can't fail the supplementary exam, and you cannot fail 2 courses in the year. Otherwise, you'll be made to retake the courses. And there are also many support systems. And a fun stat they told me on my first day was that only about 4 people per degree cohort drop out by the end of the degree. So yeah, UNSW culture. This is very exciting to me. UNSW has the best socials out of any university in New South Wales. I might be a little biased, but this is true. If you don't want to join MedSoc, which is the medical society, you can always join business/other societies to make friends, because typically other societies have a stronger uni culture. UNSW MedSoc, however, luckily enough, I was elected as secretary for 2024, and it's very safe to say that I love MedSoc. So UNSW MedSoc is a medical society run by medical students for medical students. So we run social and academic events and try and keep your mental health up. So work-life balance. I've talked about this before. I think any med course, you really do need a good work-life balance. Otherwise, you'll be like me here with my almost 10,000 Ankis I haven't done. But I did do like 8,000 to 10,000 Ankis just this year. It was horrible. These are all my whiteboards from studying. This is my friends at the hospital. This is my friend telling me to go home and stop studying, etc. But you do have a lot of fun if you make time for it. And sorry, Leo, but we also graffitied USyd for med show promo. It was in the graffiti tunnel, but that's also very fun. So this is my conclusion. UNSW is not for everyone, but if you have the values like you want to study an undergraduate degree / you're very, very sure you want to do medicine, you want a gradual exposure to clinical skills, and you want a busy social life and busy study life, and want to stay in Sydney, UNSW might be the choice for you. Number 2, what you're all here for. How do I get into UNSW? What does it take to get in? Here's the process. You first sit your UCAT, which I'm sure a lot of you have had already. Now, this is stats that they released at open day. The lowest UCAT for the cohort that applied in 2021 was 2,890. However, the lowest UCAT in my year was 3,020. So that's a huge jump up. That's almost a jump up of 200 points, which is insane. ATAR, or your selection rank, so your ATAR plus any EAS or any other adjustment schemes. Your selection rank around 99.5 is considered safe, although there is some variation. I know someone in my grade who got a selection rank of 99.4, which is not a lot difference, but there is some variation there. Interview, this is what I called a vibe check interview. It's one of the most relaxed panel interviews ever, but this is good and bad, and I'll explain why. So the UCAT, for anyone who's new here and doesn't know what the UCAT is, it's a 2-hour long exam. You sit in July/August to test multiple skills, determining your skill level for medicine. Most universities will take it into account. For UNSW, generally a UCAT percentile of over 92nd percentile is required for entry, but this may vary year to year. For other unis like Western Sydney and Monash, they preference/take into account different sections, so keep an eye out for those part in the other presentations. Yeah, the ATAR. So you have your internals, your externals, and the HSC. In case anyone is curious and doesn't know, your internal mark is your internal ranks mark in the HSC. So if you come 20th in English, you'll get the 20th highest mark from the HSC exam after your cohort sits or the exams. In terms of your external mark, that's your mark in the HSC exam, and your HSC mark is the average of those two. And the ATAR arrives in your inbox after UAC does a little bit of magic and represents your rank in the entire state/HSC course. Okay. The interview. When will they be offered? You should receive an interview offer the day of ATAR release, so that's the 14th of December this year. When are the interviews? This year, the interviews will be from the 18th to 24th of December. What you'll notice is you don't have a lot of time to prep, so it's very important you stay on top and start your interview prep as soon as possible. And when should you know your results? For UNSW, it will be in the second UAC offer round, which should be sometime in January. How do the offer rounds work? Please do not ask this question, but I Googled the answer for you guys. The UAC offer rounds are dates scheduled for universities to make a course offer to you. This year, they should be the 21st of December. Mind you, most medicine offers will not be released at this date, as you'll be sitting your interviews around this time, but I believe USyd is an exception, but Leo will clarify. This is also the time where most people get their backup offer course. For example, I got my course offer of actuarial/commerce at UNSW, which was so fun. And the 11th of January, this is when most universities will give you an offer. You will get the offer from your top choice of your UAC preferences. You will not get all the offers. So keep that in mind. And a frequently asked question, how can I get multiple offers? After you receive an offer, accept the offer and enroll in the course, then go to UAC and rearrange your preferences and then wait for the next offer round. Now, mind you, if you decide to accept a later offer, make sure to unenroll in that course before the census date, otherwise you will be fined. You will have to pay for the course. Does interstate work differently? The dates may be different, so check each interstate portal site. In terms of the interview, I did sign an NDA, so I cannot go too in depth about the interview. I don't want to be expelled and sued, so I apologize for that. In terms of general tips, be honest and be yourself in your answers. So don't bother trying to be someone that you're not, because they're going to ask you a bunch of questions, and if you're just inconsistent, they'll think it's a bit suspicious. Have a list of examples ready. This means anecdotes. For UNSW, they'll ask a lot about you. They'll ask about what you've done, who you're like, why you want to study med, etc. So if you're prepared for those questions, then you'll be much stronger. Read your application. You should have sent this through the map, I believe. So read it before your interview, because sometimes they'll ask questions off the map. But if you've grown since then, you can vary your answers. But if you completely disregard it, it might look a bit like a red flag. Prepare some bullet points for the most common interview questions, such as why you want to study medicine and work experience. And most importantly, for any interview here, if you encounter a question which you don't know the answer, remain calm, because the interviewers are more interested in understanding your thought process than expecting you to have all the answers in advance. So take a moment to tackle the question and then articulate your thought process. The UNSW interview though, what you should expect, it's a panel interview with very, very personal questions. So a lot of high-performing academic individuals do fail, unfortunately. People find this interview difficult, even though it's meant to be easy. And what you should focus on, think job interview questions, but a little harder. So how are you meant to show your personality? How do you appeal to them that you're the best person that they should select for the course? What is the interview like? The interview is normally on campus at UNSW. So what I and a bunch of other people in my course did was to prevent being late, because that doesn't look good and you have a set time. You can go and scope out the campus and find the building before your scheduled date. Now on the day, you walk in and sit in a line with all the other people who have received offers and have selected your time block. You'll be called into a room by yourself with two interviewers who will ask you questions. They have multiple sections, but all the questions are personal. What I mean by that is they just ask, why do you want to study medicine? Why do you want to come to UNSW, etc. They're trying to figure out what kind of person you are. So if you don't know, then maybe you should try find out before then. It is a little time pressured, so I think you get a minute per question. So be concise, yet include detail to show your personality. UNSW is one of the shortest interviews. I think it is the shortest interview out of the interviews today. It's about 30 minutes. You don't get a lot of time. It's very relaxed. Not really. It seems much more relaxed. They're really just trying to find out what kind of person you are. And so a lot of the techniques, well, I guess theories like the halo effect, if they like you at the start, they're going to ignore your bad answers at the end. However, if they don't like you at the start at all, even if you answer well, they might still not take that into full account. So just be aware of that. So this is how you can start preparing anecdotes. So if you start collecting anecdotes, things about yourself, things about your experiences, that you're able to discuss in the interview, you'll find it much more relaxed. Get to know yourself. This is pretty important. Do you really know who you are? What are your life values and what are your most cherished experiences? A lot of, I guess UNSW is trying to find sense of self. If you don't know why you want to do med, if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what your core values are, you're not going to seem as strong of an applicant as the people who have worked that out. It's hard at our young age, but if you have some kind of an idea, it looks better. And practice, practice, practice. You want to come off as confident but not arrogant, experienced but humble, etc. Your personality really matters in the UNSW interview. And why med? You get asked this a lot, so it's helpful because every university asked it. So try and stay away from cliches and make it personal. I've asked a lot of people like why med as their first like interview-esque question, and a lot of people say I want to help people. I don't know if this triggers any other tutors in the call right now, but this is very cliche. Yes, it's a very noble cause, but if you can't make it personal, doesn't everyone want to help people? I guess that's an assumption, but most people do want to help people, so it's not enough. And they might also ask a follow-up question like, oh, you want to help people, right? Then why won't you do social work? Because you can help more people in a short amount of time doing social work. And then if you go like, well, then they know that you haven't really thought out that answer. So just be mindful of that. Okay. I don't know if I've stressed a lot of you out, so it's okay. And if you want to ask, Minnie, what if I don't get into medicine this year? I've given you a quote from my favorite, Marcus Aurelius. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. So stoicism, just remember that this too shall pass. If you don't make it this year, who says you can't make it in next year? Just stay calm. It's okay to be upset, but don't let it affect your future plans. Yeah, just take that away. Okay. Now, key takeaways, what you can do to feel prepared. Key takeaway / overview, whether it's USyd, WSU, Monash, or UNSW, or any other university, find a course that works for you. You don't need to do interview tutoring, but if you feel like you have to, it's quite beneficial in my opinion. Try answering some questions on your own and practice with friends, and stay calm. You can always try again next year, and you always work better when you are not stressed. So this is a list of things to do that I made. It's very brief, but start preparing anecdotes to discuss for any interview. Start pondering why med and figure out your core values. Practice body language and interview etiquette. And practice, practice, and more practice. And if you get an offer, scope out the campus and find the location before the interview. Thank you and good luck.
I'll be talking about my university, which is Monash. So I'm actually doing this presentation all the way down in Victoria right now. Currently the sun hasn't set, so I don't know, maybe we're just better in that way. Yeah, so Monash. So I'm going to be talking about just generally like, what is Monash, what's our course sort of like, because I know coming down to Victoria, there weren't a lot of people that I can talk to, so hopefully I can shed light on that. I'm going to be touching on just what like the application is, like David and Minnie have already talked about, but like how is that relevant to Monash? I'll be talking about the interview and the MMI structure, and just giving you guys a bit of advice on how to like approach this interview, and what are some strategies that we can do outside of just like general panel interview advice that Minnie has just given. So firstly, just about me. So I graduated 2022 with Minnie at Bruce. I graduated the 0.05. I came second in the state for Extension 1 and 7th in the state for Extension 2. So I work as a math tutor as part of TopLogic for Extension 1 and 2. I'm studying medicine at Monash, as I mentioned, but just at the universities that I've mentioned there. So I have a bit of experience, but ultimately settled down here in Monash. So I hope to give you guys a bit of advice on just Monash general. So generally just about the university, just in terms of studying medicine down in Victoria, if you're like me and want to get away from Sydney, there are two options you really have. One is Monash, and that is an undergraduate program generally. And how I guess the application or being able to be selected to Monash works is they take a third of your UCAT score, your ATAR mark, and also the interview, which USyd later on, actually at the start of the year. And generally for interstate students, you do need a relatively high ATAR and UCAT score. I know people who got in with a 99.55 UCAT and ATAR, but generally because Monash doesn't really accept as many interstate students as they do with people in Victoria, it can be a bit more difficult. With Melbourne, Melbourne offers a very similar course structure to USyd, where you have a semi-guaranteed entry into postgraduate medicine, but you will need a 99.9 ATAR for this. And yeah, I think Leo will touch a bit more on about this. So just specifically about Monash, we do actually have a postgraduate course as well, but it's located in Gippsland, which, to put in perspective, I put that on the map and it's kind of far. The undergraduate course, which is the one that generally people study, is located in Clayton. I sort of think about it as the Macquarie U of Sydney. It's relatively easy to access, but not really near the city where it's very bustling and things like that. It is a 5-year course, and it's very similar to WSU in terms of the structure. I'm pretty sure WSU stole from us, but let's not go on that right now. It's 2 years of pre-clin, and we just learn on campus about topics that anatomy, histology, physiology, as we mentioned. And 3 years we are placed at a hospital. We're actually placed at a hospital each year, and we rotate around. And yeah, our semesters are 12 weeks in general, which is actually less than UNSW. So we're also better in that sense. But yeah, so 5 years, and there's an offshore research year, but I will touch on that later in the presentation. Yeah, so Monash, down in Victoria, what's it like to apply to it? Is it even worth it applying? So just generally for interstate applicants, there's only about 20 to 30 per cohort. From my cohort, currently there's 8 students from Sydney. And whether, that's a lot, I don't know. You can come with your own decision, own perspective about that. But the applications will happen over VTAC. So Minnie's already talked about UAC, which is the uni application, website for New South Wales. Because Monash is obviously in Victoria, you need to apply over VTAC, which is another portal you have to search up on the internet. The special thing about Monash is the interviews are actually one of the latest interviews you'll ever sit. They happen around late January. So for me, they were on the 20th and 23rd of January. But yeah, it can really vary. And as Minnie has mentioned, UNSW interviews will happen around early December. So yeah, having it in late January is relatively late. And one thing that's really important is that English and chemistry are prerequisites that you're expected to have done in order to get into the course. You need a band 5 in English and chemistry. So to be honest, if you get below band 5 in English or chemistry, you're probably not going to get an ATAR good enough to apply to Monash anyway. So just do English and chemistry. That's my point. Yeah, so in terms of the application, I've mentioned it's a third ATAR and a third UCAT, and it's there's already been a lot of discussion about what they look like. I'm going to be focusing a bit more on just the interview at Monash specifically, which is the MMI, or the multi-mini interview. The way it's structured is you'll have 6 stations, and you'll get a question each station, whether that be a scenario they want you to talk about. It could be some ethical decisions, and I'll touch on those later. And you'll also be asked other questions related to each station. So a bit like David has already mentioned, you get a stimulus, then just ask you one question at a time. You get 1 minute to read the stimulus, and then 8 minutes to talk through all 5 questions. at once. So you would need to be very aware of time during the MMI. So yeah, there are 3 types of questions you might get. One of them is like a scenario question or situation question. So for example, if you ask a question like a 14-year-old patient goes to a GP and asks for a contraceptive, yeah, you need to just talk through like what you do in this like situation, and what are some people you might want to like consider, stakeholders. You need to make sure your response are structured and that, yeah, they are like coherent and they give some insight into the scenario. But also I think some just tips generally for these scenario questions. Think about the people involved and like how they would be feeling. I think that was a big one for me, because I would be very critical about like, okay, this is a scenario, I'm gonna fix it, but also like, can you consider like how are the people in the scenario feeling? And can you help them in that regard? And also get help from people. That's like low-key kind of hacks. The second type of question you might get is an ethical question. And the way we sort of approach questions like these, or one way that, or like one consideration that we can mention, is the 4 pillars of medical ethics, which, yeah, you can research in your own time, but it's beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice, and making sure that we balance all of them is like the important factors to consider within an ethical question. So for example, if someone like freezes, life-threatening condition, what are the issues involved? On the next slide, on this slide, I've talked about some topics that would be good in order to research, just to get familiar with some of the questions they can ask. And the main one is to research on rural and Indigenous medicine, because a lot of universities like to ask questions like this. And being informed as to like, okay, what are some reasons maybe I'd want to support a program for one of these issues, or what are some reasons I wouldn't want to support a program, would be a few just things that would be good to prepare. But yeah, other topics which are like relatively important are the ones I've listed out there. And yeah, just getting informed about these topics I reckon are pretty important. Yeah, and the final question, or the final type of question, is just a question Minnie has touched on. But yeah, they're like personal questions. So the way personal questions work in an MMI, because it's not like a panel interview where they just like ask you question after question. Remember, it's a station where we get like a STEM and we get asked sub questions after that. You might get like a scenario question at the start. It'll be like a scenario and like, how would you respond? What would happen if there was like another person involved in this situation? Like, what are some reasons this person might have done that? That's just like a breakdown of like a generic scenario question. But at the end, they might hit you with like okay, this scenario required you to, you know, be empathetic. Tell me about a time you were empathetic. So personal questions are always added like at the end of a scenario, or even just having like a scenario state, like a personal question station. That could be another thing that universities do. But yeah, as Minnie's mentioned, being able to just talk about yourself and knowing your values, but having a list of anecdotes or just some scenarios that you'd be keen to talk about if you ever got a question like this on qualities generally that are appropriate for a doctor. So empathy, teamwork, communication, resolving conflict, being culturally sensitive, which is actually a pretty big thing in Monash, because Monash is pretty keen about cultural sensitivity. Just resilience, flexibility, and time management. But obviously there are a lot of other qualities, and having anecdotes or experiences you can talk about would be really beneficial for preparation. Yeah, and then what about the question like why do you want to study at Monash? And I've listed a few points here, but obviously the main one's like it's 5 years, and just like as a side note, it's like 24 weeks, which is so much less study time, and like once you've done with year 12, like maybe it's good to take a break. Having that reduced like study time is pretty good. But also the fact that, yeah, there's a huge focus on clinical experience. So as I mentioned, like having full-time placement after the 3rd year is like just pretty good generally. And yeah, I guess I'll just touch on what med is like at Monash. You saw Minnie's timetable. This is mine, generally for like a uni week. But that's on top of another 10 hours of lectures that we expect to do in our own time. So just imagine this is just like purely on campus, and then 10 hours whether that be like after we get home during the weekend at like 3 a.m. at night when we're meant to sleep. I think generally I always compare it back to school. School is always like 6 hours, 5 days, which is pretty good. Compared to this, there's not as much time on campus and it's pretty chill relatively. But that being said, yeah, it's still like you still want to push yourself academically, even though the course itself is pass-fail. Mainly due to the fact they're trying to teach you a lot of stuff within those 12 weeks. And yeah, here are just photos of, photos I just picked out of my time in Monash. The top left one is like extracurriculars. We're doing Teddy Bear Hospital, where essentially we just go around schools talking to kids about medicine and doing interactive things with them. Picture on the right, my friends, we're practicing for a clinical assessment, which we have quite frequently. They're like scattered throughout the semester. We have about like 4 per semester. And the bottom left is just like an image of like what our classes are like. That's mainly one of our interactive classes. We just have people sit around and would have like slides that we create and we talk through. I think that one's on thrombosis or something. Yeah, so I think that would be it for me. In terms of just resources about MMI, feel free to contact TopLogic and I'll be willing to give you a few more tips about like resources, but the main one is this free book you find online called Mastering the MMI, written by a 3rd-year Monash student. It's very good in terms of, it's like 50 scenarios and like practice answers, which I would say are very helpful if you want to practice with like a friend. Also look at like YouTube channels, look on the website, just like general resources. Yeah.
Nice to meet everyone. So just a really quick run through about the content. So I'm going to talk about who I am, what the DDMP or the double degree medical program is. I'll talk about the course structure and course requirements, the application process and the interview. And finally, we'll get to our Q&A. Just because of the nature of my course, it won't be as long of a slideshow as everyone else. So that's good news for everyone, I guess. So who am I? So I'm Leo. So I'm currently teaching chemistry and junior science at TopLogic, and I am a medical student at USyd in the double degree medical program. So that means I am studying both a Bachelor of Science and a Doctor of Medicine, and I've just finished my Bachelor of Science, which means I'm at the end of my 3rd year, and next year I'm going on into medicine in the postgrad program. I've also graduated from Balkan Hills at 2020, which is a long time ago for a lot of you guys, which feels sad because of when COVID first came about. And so what is the DDMP? So the DDMP, or also known as the double degree medical program, is one of the 2 main ways to get into the medical course at USyd. So the first way is through the postgrad entry, which will be meaning that you do the GAMSAT or maybe also the interview, depending on whether they decide to put it back into the application process. So that's the postgrad entry. In terms of the undergraduate entry, you have to go through the double degree medical program, which means you get provisional entry, given that you either complete a Bachelor of Science or a Bachelor of Arts. So when we say provisional, it means you do have to meet some requirements. And these are just things like make sure you pass everything, maintain a WAM of 65, which just means you have a credit, which isn't that hard to get if you're in the DDMP anyway. There's also some other courses like volunteering experience that you have to do, some reflective writing that you have to take in, but otherwise it's pretty calm, so it's pretty much guaranteed. In terms of number of positions, there's actually quite a very small amount of positions offered, in that 30 domestic and 10 international positions. So for the sake of everyone here, I'm assuming that everyone here is domestic, so that means only 30 positions will be open to people here. In terms of the course structure, so 7 years, which is probably, I think, the longest out of everyone here, which means that by the time some of these guys graduate, I'll still be in uni, which sucks because or I also happen to be the oldest here. But keep that in mind when you think about whether you want to come to USyd for medicine or not. In terms of the undergraduate course, you can either do a Bachelor of Science or a Bachelor of Arts. So that means you get to choose 2 majors or a major and a minor. So what that means is you'll be choosing a specific course or specific field to specialize in. So for example, I'm majoring in anatomy and histology, so that's talking about the body, looking at how the muscles are, how different holes and stuff are in your head and stuff, and you look at cells. And I'm minoring in immunology as well. But I know a lot of people who chose not to major in a lot of the medical related fields. For example, some of my mates are doing data science or computer science. or even things like English and literature, gender studies, and so on. So there's a lot of different things you can actually try and do. So it is a really, really good opportunity that I do regret not taking up in terms of branching out into non-medical fields. So that's something that's really good about our course. If you do a Bachelor of Arts, there's even more things you can choose, like econometrics. There's things like music, I guess, as well. I think there's music in there. There's also languages. I know someone's doing French, someone's doing Latin, so there's a lot of different things you can choose. So your undergraduate, the first 3 years of the course is very, very flexible, and you can pretty much study whatever the heck you want. In terms of your postgrad, though, you go into the Sydney Medical Program, what's what they call it, which is the MD that USyd offers, and that one is you don't really get much of a choice. You just follow the program and do medicine as it is. In terms of the course requirements, you do need to get an ATA of 99.95 or be an E12 student. But the good side is, I guess, UCAD, you don't really need UCAD. In terms of the chances of getting in once you do get an interview offer, the math works out that a little bit under 50 applicants are expected if you just look at the ATA of 99.95. But in reality, the number actually happens to be much larger because you have to take into account all the IB students who achieved a perfect score of 45. So that's like schools like Trinity or NLC and so on. They produce a lot of IB students to get a 45, which is equivalent to a 99.95. So there's additional people who apply that is not from the HSC course. Also, something that you have to consider as well is there's a lot of students from New Zealand who count as domestic applicants. So that means that people who do Cambridge or the NCA course or even IB, which is a little bit rare for New Zealand, but they also get to apply. So in reality, you'll be looking at least 100 plus applicants. And in addition to that, there's also E12 students as well. So there's a lot of people that actually are competing for USyd course. So just please be aware that it is quite low chances of getting in, unfortunately. The application process is very straightforward though. So all you have to do is just preference it in UAC, which is the undergraduate application or university application course portal. And in terms of when you're going to get a interview offer, you will get it immediately after ATAs are announced. I believe it's like a week or something right after interviews are announced, ATAs are announced. So it is pretty close in terms of, well, I think it's the earliest interview as well. So do keep that in mind when you're preparing for interviews. But in terms of how to prepare for interview, USyd is the one that is probably the hardest to prepare for because, but at the same time, it's actually really relaxed as well because what actually happens is generally it's an in-person interview starting again from this year, and you have a written component where you answer some questions for around 30 minutes. So they will have like scenario-based questions, some general questions about who you are, why you're into medicine, and so on, and it's relatively standard. And I think it's the most generic interview that I've sat across all the other interviews, such as UNSW, WSU, Adelaide, and all the other ones out there, UQ, and so on. After the written component, which is around 30 minutes or so, you then go into your group discussion. And what happens there is you're going to be sitting down with around 5-ish other applicants, and you'll have the academics, so the professors and different interviewers. And you'll also have double degree medical program students or COMA students who will also be helping the academics conduct their interviews. So for example, the last 2 years, I would have gone on to help explain what student life is like as a COMA student myself. And it's been a really enriching process. So if you do get an interview at USyd, I really encourage you guys to interact with the COMA students because they'll have a lot of advice to offer, a lot of insight to give you about USyd and student life there. In terms of the interview content for group discussion, it's very, very open-ended. So they only have a couple of questions that the interviewer will actually talk about. But after that, everything else is kind of taken around, and the interviewer will ask everyone to speak, and everyone will get a relatively equal chance to speak, and you'll get to discuss about the question and so on. Unfortunately, because it is a very small interview, so not a lot of people actually sit the interview, it's hard for me to disclose any more information about it because I've also signed the NDA. But if you have any like general questions, feel free to ask later on. So I mentioned COMA earlier on. So COMA is the Combined Medicine Association. So that's kind of the equivalent of a medical society for all the other unis. I think Minnie mentioned hers as well, which is quite a lively bunch, I must admit. So I'm a little bit jealous of the society. But COMA is actually the undergrad portion of the DDMP students. So that means that the Bachelor of Science, the Bachelor of Arts, studying people who are in DDMP will be part of COMA. Once you go into your postgrad, you will leave COMA and go into the University of Sydney's Medical Society. So that's a separate society. Yes. Currently, I'm the president, and I just finished my my presidency, so I'm free. So that's a good thing. But if you want to ask anything about life at campus or student life in general at USyd, or in terms of what it's like being in the DDMP, so please feel free to go ahead if that's the case. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. So I guess we'll head on into the Q&A session.